The House of Death in Greenwich Village. I should have stopped when I felt that shiver run down my spine. You know that feeling when something inside you screams not to go forward? Well, I ignored it. Humans have this stupid tendency to think that certain warnings are just paranoia. But some places, some stories shouldn't be questioned. The house on West 10th Street looked like any other. Red bricks, tall windows, the air of an old, history-laden New York. But if you looked longer, something twisted inside you, as if the very air there was tainted with something that didn't belong to this world. I didn't believe in urban legends. I was never the type to be easily impressed. But when I heard about the House of Death, I'll admit something piqued my curiosity. A place where tragedies piled up like an inescapable cycle. Murders, suicides, disappearances, reports of dark presences, shadowy figures, whispers in the middle of the night. Something in that house called to people and then never let them leave the same way. But what made me cross that rusty gate wasn't the story. It was what happened to him. No one talks about it openly. The newspapers don't mention it. The neighborhood avoids the subject. But I know, I saw, and now, all I can do is tell what happened before the house decides to silence me too. The call of the house, they say certain places have a presence of their own, as if they're alive. The House of Death was no different. From the moment I first saw it, I felt something strange, an invisible weight pressing on my chest, as if the air that was denser, older, more wrong. It was a cold November night when I stopped in front of 14 West 10th Street. The wind cut through the narrow streets of Greenwich Village, making the dry leaves dance on the asphalt. I wasn't there by chance. That house had been calling me for weeks, through stories, accounts, rumors. And now, standing before it, I realized nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. Up close, the house looked dead. There were no lights on, no signs of life, just a dark facade and a heavy wooden door, marked by time. The iron gate was icy to the touch, as if it stole the warmth from my skin. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to turn back, but it was too late. It was then that I noticed. Someone was watching me. My eyes scanned the darkness of the upper windows. No curtains moved, no silhouette in sight, but the feeling was unmistakable. A presence, motionless, just waiting. My heart raced. But fear? Fear hadn't fully arrived yet. It was still just an uneasy doubt, a premonition. And then I entered. The first step into hell, the doorknob gave way with a dry snap, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow hallway swallowed by shadows. The smell that hit me was heavy, damp, like old wood mixed with something I couldn't identify. The silence inside was absolute, not the comforting kind, but something oppressive, as if the house was holding its breath. I took a step inside and felt the air change, as if something or someone had noticed my presence. I closed the door behind me. A mistake. The cold intensified, and the darkness seemed to have its own weight. Every inch of that house carried a story, a trace of something that shouldn't be there. I climbed the first steps of the staircase, my hand sliding along the icy railing. And then came the first sound, a sigh, low, long, coming from somewhere above. I froze. I was no longer alone. But at that moment, I still believed it could be explained, that maybe someone was there. But there was no one. There never had been. And I could no longer leave. The weight of the presence, my instinct told me to run. Something inside me screamed that I shouldn't be there, that it was better to leave while I still could. But logic, that damned logic, insisted it was all in my imagination. Old houses make strange noises, I thought. I forced myself to believe that as I moved down the narrow hallway, where the wooden floor creaked under my feet, as if the house was whispering its displeasure at my presence. Then I felt it. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I just felt it. The weight. It was as if the air had grown denser around me, as if something invisible was there, close enough to touch my skin without me seeing it. A pressure on the back of my neck. A cold running down my spine. I knew what it meant. I wasn't alone. The sigh I heard earlier wasn't a mistake. Something was there with me. My breathing became shallow, and my muscles locked for a moment. But instead of running, I did the opposite. I kept walking. It was a mistake. I know that now. But At the time, I wanted to see. I needed to understand. I still thought I could explain. The locked room in the house was a labyrinth of shadows and old wood. I passed through a narrow hallway where dusty paintings hung crookedly. Some were old portraits, faces of strangers who seemed to watch me with empty eyes. I approached a slightly open door at the end of the hallway. Something pulled me there. I pushed the door carefully, feeling the resistance of the swollen wood. The room was small and dark, with a single beam of light coming through a dust-covered window. And that's when I noticed, in the corner of the room, next to the bed, there was something strange on the floor. A mark. Ashes. It was as if someone had burned something there. The smell of burnt was still lingered in the air, mixed with a sweet, sickening odor. I looked around and noticed something even more disturbing. The closet door was slightly open. There was something inside. An irrational impulse took over me. I knew I shouldn't, but I approached anyway. My hand touched the wood of the door, and before I could open it, it opened on its own. The first contact, the closet creaked as it opened, revealing a dark void. But it wasn't an ordinary void. It was a deep darkness, as if there was no real bottom inside. Then it happened. The first sign that this wasn't just an old house with stories. Something moved inside. I didn't see it. I didn't hear it. But I felt it. The air grew even heavier. A sour, metallic smell filled my mouth. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. And then a shadow. It slipped out of the closet like smoke, but it had form. Something humanoid, but raw and distorted. The room seemed smaller, the walls closing in around me. It was then that I finally understood. The House of Death wasn't just haunted. It was alive. And now it knew I was there. The first encounter, I tried to blink, breathe, do anything that would make me doubt what I was seeing. But it wasn't a trick of my mind. That thing was there, moving with an unreal slowness, as if it existed in a different time than mine. The air was dense, charged with something invisible that pressed against my chest, as if cold hands were gripping me from within. A metallic taste filled my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then it spoke, not with words, not with a sound that could be recorded. It was a voice without a voice, a whisper inside my head, like an intrusive thought that wasn't mine. He's still here. My breath failed. My heart raced in primitive panic. The shadow dissolved in a sharp movement, too fast for my eyes to fully capture. But I felt it. I felt that it hadn't gone away, just spread through the house, watching me from corners my vision couldn't reach. I had two options, run or find out what it meant. And for some sick reason, I chose the second. The whispers upstairs, I left the room hurriedly, feeling the pressure on the back of my neck lessen, but not disappear completely. The hallway seemed darker than before, as if the shadows had grown in my absence. Then I heard it, footsteps upstairs. They weren't the natural creaks of an old house. They were real footsteps. Someone was walking on the second floor. Each step was calculated, slow, as if the thing knew I was listening. My body wanted to run in the opposite direction, but my mind needed to know. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe I wasn't alone. I climbed the first steps of the staircase, my hands sweating as it gripped the cold railing. Each step creaked like a muffled scream. When I reached the top, the sound stopped. The silence was absolute. And then, the door at the end of the hallway opened on its own, slowly, as if it was calling me. The forbidden room, the door was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of what seemed to be an old office. The light from the street lamp outside illuminated the interior in pale, distorted tones. I took a hesitant step inside, smelling old paper and something else, dampness, maybe mold. There was a dark wooden desk covered in books and scattered papers, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. But what caught my eye was a painting on the wall, a dusty, framed portrait, and in it, a man. His gaze was sharp, penetrating, as if he was staring directly at me from the painting. But what sent chills down my spine wasn't the intensity of the gaze. It was a suffocating sense of familiarity. I had never seen that man before, but something inside me said he had seen me many, many times. Then, without warning, the portrait fell from the wall, and behind it, something was written on the wood, a name, Jonathan Wells, murdered in 1929. My blood ran cold. I knew that name shouldn't be there. But before I could react, a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the faint light from the street. And then, in the darkness, a voice, whispered, hoarse, coming from all corners at once. You finally returned. The past that never dies, the room turned icy. My hands trembled, and my entire body told me to run, but I couldn't move. The voice seemed to be inside my head, an ancient presence, trapped there for decades, recognizing me. You know who I am. But I didn't, or at least, I thought I didn't. My eyes scanned the room, searching for an exit, but then something else caught my attention. The papers on the desk weren't just old scribbles. They were records, diaries, small fragments of stories from those who had passed through that house. And one of them had a name that took my breath away. My own last name. Trembling, I pulled the sheet closer. Henry Wells. Disappeared in 1957. My heart stopped. Wells. The same name that was behind the painting. The same name that, before I could finish the thought, I felt something behind me. A shadow. Someone breathing on my neck. The truth that never rests, I closed my eyes for a second, trying to control the panic. When I opened them again, I saw a reflection in the window in front of me. The shadow was there, tall, motionless, staring at me. I turned on impulse, but the room was empty. The sound of breathing still echoed, and then a different sound, scratching, scraping, writing. The desk. Something was carving words into the wood before my eyes. You've always been here. My entire body shivered. My heart pounded against my ribs like an out-of-control drum. The shadow, the name, the voice. This wasn't a coincidence. I hadn't come to this house by chance. It brought me here. And now, it wouldn't let me leave. The blood tied the phrase carved into a pulse before my eyes as if it were alive. You've always been here. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. But at the same time, something inside me twisted, as if a deeply buried memory was trying to surface. The name Wells still burned in my mind. The man in the portrait, the diary, the whisper in the dark. I was connected to this house in some way. And then, the truth began to reveal itself. A dry noise echoed through the room. A knock coming from under the floor. Soft at first, then louder as if something or someone was trying to escape from a grave. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, flee, get out of that cursed house. But it was then that the voice came again. This time clear, defined, as if it were right beside me. Blood calls, Henry, you can't run from who you are. My body froze. Henry, the name in the diary. The name of someone who disappeared in 1957. But it wasn't just a name. It was my name. Memories that were never mine. The floor creaked under my feet. My mind spun, trying to piece together an impossible puzzle. My name wasn't Henry. Or was it? I closed my eyes for a moment, and then images began to surface. A dusty, distorted childhood. A boy running down a dark hallway. The house, this house, but in another time. Someone screaming a name. My name. My heart was beating so hard I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. My hands trembled as I opened the diary again. The pages were yellowed, but what mattered wasn't the paper. It was what was written on them. Time isn't a straight line. What was still is. The house never lets us go. I trembled as I turned the pages, until a photograph fell to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, and my blood ran cold. In the photo, a boy with my face, but in a time long before mine. The heart of the house, the walls seemed to breathe around me. The cold grew, penetrating to the bone. The truth was there, suffocating, swallowing me whole. I wasn't a stranger to this house. I was part of it, and it wanted me to remember. A dry snap echoed through the room. The floor trembled slightly, and a piece of the floorboard gave way, revealing something buried beneath. Dust rose into the air. My stomach churned. I approached slowly, knowing I shouldn't. But it was too late. The wood was rotten, the space below dark. and inside the hole, there were bones. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream. The shock, the terror, the truth, it all hit me like a violent blow. And then I saw it, a ring among the bones. I recognized it instantly. It was mine. The cycle never ends, the air closing around me. The entire house seemed to tremble, as if it had been waiting for this moment for decades. Now you remember, the voice whispered. The shadows in the room stirred. I felt the eyes of the house on me, waiting, wanting, demanding something. What was buried there was me. I had never left this house. I had never had a life outside of it. I had been dead all along. My body gave out. My heart slowed. The shadows closed in, enveloping me like a cold, eternal embrace. And then for the first time, I understood. The house of death never lets anyone go. It just waits for them to return, waits for them to remember. And when that happens, it takes them forever. The last breath, the last thing I saw was a photo falling to the floor. The boy stared at me. But now it wasn't just a photo. His eyes, my eyes, blinked. And then everything went dark. The silence filled the house. Time moved on. Life outside continued its course. But inside the house of death, a new name was carved into the wood. Henry Wells, lost forever. And the door of the house remained slightly open, waiting for the next.